I think having challenges in your career and dealing with a lot of crap is really hard, but it can be very fulfilling at the same time too, because of how it forces you to grow as a person.
Hi. Hello.
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 Hello, and welcome to Architecting.
This is a podcast about the lives of architects.
About the people and stories behind the buildings that we see around us and the images that brought them to life.
And with the very international world that we live in,
this show will purposefully be local and narrow,
only focusing on the Colorado community of designers.
Hi, I'm the host of Architecting, Adam Wagner. I'm a Denver-based architect. I'm married to an architect. I have 2 architecture degrees, and I've worked for a dozen different architecture firms in 3 different countries. But for these last 5 years, I've been rooted in Denver, where I am at Open Studio Architecture, and I teach at the University of Colorado, Denver. I love connecting with other designers and learning from their experiences. Now I'm broadcasting these stories with the goal of creating a stronger local community. And that brings us to our guest today, Kaci Taylor, who is the founder of the 5WH and an architect at Page Southerland Page. So I came in contact with Kaci through the Christopher Kelly Leadership Program, an AIA program that my wife, Rebecca Wagner, chairs. And Kaci has, I guess, the really surprising distinction of being the only Black female architect in the state of Colorado. So Kaci grew up in LA. She attended the University of San Francisco and then Tulane before moving to Denver. And through her career, she has shown a really inspiring passion for helping people and improving the lives of others with design. And in this interview, she tells us her frank and powerful story of navigating the built environment in general and navigating the profession as a Black woman. So for me, it was a really eye-opening and challenging conversation. Hers is a story that is quite different from mine, my story and experiences as a white male within this profession. And she and others like her experience a real uphill battle in addition to the regular difficulties of working as an architect. And so I hope this episode helps stimulate conversations for you and or actions in your own lives. We still have a long way to go with this. So today, after the credits, there's another bonus episode that includes an extended conversation that we had about race and the profession, as well as what Kaci is currently pushing forward with AIA Colorado. So I hope you enjoy. So our goal at Architecting is to help connect Colorado designers, and nobody is already doing this better than Modern in Denver. For over a decade, Modern in Denver has been striving to bring architects together and to educate the public about what good design can be and can accomplish. I'm very excited to be working together with them now on this shared goal. So over the years, they have constantly created fantastically curated stories about Colorado designers and projects, and work to connect the profession with live local events. So go out now, buy a copy of their new print issue, subscribe to their weekly email list, and follow them on Instagram. What's life look like right now?
It's really busy. We just started CA for an office reposition project with Page. And so it's been just like nonstop, just craziness right now. Kind of hacking through all our submittals and RFIs and all the beginning fun stuff. And it's just like, here are all of our questions. And we need them tomorrow. So yeah, it's been really busy. And then some of my own personal projects, getting a permit set response comments out, some design projects going on as well. So it's just been nonstop and it's good.
How do you balance that? So like how many does Paige know that you're working on something else? and what's your hours look like?
Yeah, so Paige knows when that 5280 article came out, it kind of became public.
Yeah.
And they've actually been really supportive. And that's been surprisingly great. And hours wise, a lot. So basically working a full-time, like basically 2 full-time jobs. So I work a lot of nights and weekends all the time so far.
Nice.
So, but it's been good though. I think, working remotely for the last year, I have a lot more time on my hands. And so it's been a nice way of kind of staying busy and not kind of dealing with like COVID, like anxiety and like, just like, oh God, what do I do now?
Yeah.
So.
It fills up that time. There's no time to sit and like hit the end of the Netflix scroll and like
I mean, there's definitely been plenty of that, but like
right.
It's been a balance for sure. And luckily the projects of my own projects are small enough where I can like, hack it out, just knock it all out pretty quickly within a short period of time. So I don't have to, I'm not spending a ton of time on these projects. They're small enough where it's just, I can like kind of get through things pretty quickly. So still a lot of work, and I still spend a lot of time just like thinking about things and you're like, oh God, I need to do this.
Yeah.
But it's been good.
But it's probably pretty nice I find it's the worst when you only have one thing to think about, right? Like we get stuck on one project and
yeah, absolutely.
Having those multiple. Yeah.
And it's also been nice too, because they're different. And so it's like I move from one design problem to the next, but they're different problems. And so it allows my brain to kind of switch into different kind of like mindset, which in going back to, one issue, I actually sometimes have a better perspective to be able to be like, oh, we could do this to fix it, or approach it this way. So it's been definitely a challenge, but also interesting to see how things overlap and kind of relate to each other too, between the two realms. So, yeah.
That comes pretty naturally to you.
I've had a lot of positions where I've been managing multiple projects at a time, and so I do better when I'm busy, and I feel like a part of it, the reason why, is because I just don't have time to like overthink. I don't like I can just what do I need to do? What is the right answer? Let's think through really quickly and figure it out. And that's kind of how I was also like in grad school and undergrad with architecture. I worked continuously throughout both, at least usually between 20 hours a week in addition to school. And so I had very little time. So like me doing all-nighters wasn't really a thing because I had very little time to work on stuff. And so because of that, I was able to get everything that I needed to get done in a quick, in a timely manner because I had no time.
Yeah.
And I couldn't just pontificate on all the things that could happen. Like I was like, this is the direction that we need to go. We're going to go in this direction. So there are definitely days where I'm just like overwhelmed and just like frazzled and like stressed out. And there's some days where it's just like going. But yeah.
That's such a good skill to learn in school. Yeah, I feel like I didn't learn it till like later in grad school and undergrad. Yeah, you just have horrible time management. But was that pretty typical for people in your class to be working? Like in my class of 65, I think there was two people who worked. And so seeing my students who are all working, it's kind of foreign a little bit. But was that typical for?
In undergrad, yes, I think the majority of my classmates had some sort of job, whether it was like a TA position or some sort of like kind of work study program. So everyone kind of worked, like 10 hours a week around there. I did work study, and I also had like a retail job downtown. I would work on the weekends. I did like work study stuff during the week. And in grad school, I was maybe one of 2 people who had a job. But I mean, my class, there's also like 14 of us in grad school. So it's really? The percentage is much higher. But yeah, it's hard. I mean, it's hard to be able to balance and do both. And for me, it kind of came down to like, how much money am I willing to go into debt versus how much money can I make in the meantime to like offset some of those costs on the road. And for me, it also like, I just do better in life when I have lots of things going on.
So is that part of how you would explain yourself? So if you had your 2-line bio that I make people do, is that part of it, or?
Possibly. Yeah, I definitely like, and I think it kind of goes back to like my childhood where like my mom was always like, you're in gymnastics and you're dancing and you're swimming and you're taking the piano lessons. Like there's always something that I was doing. And so growing up in that kind of environment, and now I'm just like, what am I doing next? What's the next step? What am I reading next? What am I doing next? Which is a blessing and a curse at the same time, because sometimes I have a hard time just being like, I'm going to sit here and watch Law and SVU for the next 12 hours and that's fine, so finding that balance is sometimes can be a little difficult, but I feel like as I've gotten older, I've been able to kind of prioritize, kind of my own, like, self-help, self-help and kind of self-worth and find that balance between working a ton and being productive, but also just like taking time for myself and relaxing and like, so yes and no.
So where did you grow up?
I'm from LA. So I grew up in LA,
Okay.
born and raised. And I lived there until I went to college.
So what did that kind of give you, maybe personality wise, or like, how did it push you towards architecture or not? Or
yeah, well, I think I became aware of architecture and the idea of architecture and the idea that spaces can impact you in a way, and you feel a particular way in spaces by growing up in LA and being around some great buildings. And I think also part of it is, I was kind of in like the private school system all throughout elementary school and high school and stuff like that. And so I have a lot of friends who like parents are very wealthy, and it's like, being in their homes in these like magnificent places and kind of really seeing what quality design does and how that can make you feel was eye-opening for me then. And I feel like I was able to, it took a long time for me to be able to like verbalize what that meant to me and verbalize what I felt. But that I think was like, I was always really just in awe of some of the buildings that I, went into, drove past by, that kind of stuff.
So did that translate pretty easily into you saying, oh, I want to be an architect, or?
No.
Yeah.
Well, sort of. I actually didn't really realize, like, I had in the back of my mind, like, the idea of like, oh, like someone's designing this, I guess, somehow. But it wasn't really until my dad was like, oh, you should look into architecture. Because I think I was like talking to him about like, oh, I really like this, whatever. And so he's like, oh, you should, think about architecture. And this was like maybe 8th or 9th grade. And I was like, oh, okay, that could be interesting. And so like that kind of started getting me a little more interested in like potentially majoring in it and like what that might mean. And I've just been with it ever since for the most part. So.
But then you went to school in San Francisco?
Yep.
What was that choice like? Yeah, because there's a lot of schools in LA, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, I think also growing up in LA, and I love LA, and it's, my heart, a part of my heart's still there. It's home. My family still lives there. I was really excited to leave LA when I went away for college. I literally was just like, I'm not applying to any schools on the West Coast because I wanted something completely different. And then I ended up at a school on the West Coast. But, San Francisco as a city was a fantastic place to be, especially during the time when I was there. And just, being around the buildings there, the history, the culture, the life, kind of having your not first, but your real experience of like being a quote unquote adult, in a big city like that was spectacular. It was so much fun.
Yeah.
And the program, I was really attracted to the school because of the architecture program. USF is a Jesuit university, and I'm not all religious, but their approach, their slogan was basically changing hearts and minds, or educating hearts and minds to change the world. And like that, I was like, I like that. I vibe well with that.
Yeah.
And in the program, there was 20 of us in my class. So it was small, really intimate. The architecture department was new. I was, I think, the 4th to 5th graduating class in that program. And it was really focused on designing for others. It was really focusing on how can you use architecture as a tool to improve your environment and the environment of others around you. And that really kind of formulated and really, made it really concrete, my approach to architecture and design and why I like it and why I'm still in it.
That's interesting how you sort of ended up in that small program with that direction. I mean, you saw that when you were going into it, when you were applying there, that was kind of, I feel like it's so hard when you're going into undergrad to actually understand what you're going into, right?
Yeah. I think I didn't really know fully, but I definitely toured a bunch of different campuses and schools, and like that was the one program that just felt right. For me, I'm very much like kind of an intuition-based person. It's like, if it feels right, if it feels like it feels right, then I'll do it. Or if it doesn't feel right, I won't do it. And of course, it's like I go there and I visit. It's like the one sunny, most perfect, beautiful day in San Francisco ever lived. And it was just like everything was wonderful. And then I moved there, and my freshman year, they had record high rains. And I was like, why am I here? Like moving from sunny Southern California to like rainy and cold Northern California. But it was a fantastic experience.
I guess like what did that program look like to be more focused on people? I guess, I mean, obviously it probably starts with the studio projects and the kind of focus of that.
Yep.
And faculty and, what else kind of made it special?
Yeah, so they have a very robust community design program. And I worked on several projects with local nonprofits that have projects all over really Central America and also some in Africa as well, designing and then building those projects. So one of them I worked on was a community center in Nicaragua. So I, worked on the design amongst myself and many other people. And then, during a summer, we went down there for a month and helped build. And so, and we also work with nonprofits in San Francisco as well. And so working on projects that had a lot of meaning and had a lot of impact for other people was very much a foundation for a lot of the projects that we worked on, either, studio based or kind of more like real life application based as well. And I think being in San Francisco itself, in such a city that's, kind of been founded on like advocacy and fighting for people's rights, you kind of like, that's kind of just like in the feeling and the vibe of the city.
Yeah.
Of wanting to help and help others.
Yeah. So then you graduated, and what happened?
Graduated in 2009.
What'd you do with all that idealism? Yeah, right. Yeah. Idealism in 2009.
2009, recession was in full swing. So my senior year of college, I applied to grad schools and I got into a few places, but I wasn't excited. I wasn't really looking forward to it. And I think for me, I just like needed like a break from school, like a bit of a pause. And so I took a break. I moved back to LA, and I was working for a consulting firm that does a lot of ergonomic design and kind of, so somewhat architecture related, but like not, still doing like the human body. And then I reapplied to grad school, and I was like, I really realized like I only needed like a summer off because like 4 months after graduating, I was very bored. And so I reapplied to grad school, and then I went to Tulane the following year.
What was that choice like? I mean, it's not an obvious location change, right?
Yeah, I mean, a part of it is, so they also have an urban build program, which they, one semester is design and one other semester is building of homes within different neighborhoods, kind of in need in New Orleans. And so that was really attractive. Also attractive, it's a small program. There were 14 of us in my class. And it was also a fairly new program as well. So I kind of have this weird habit of being like a guinea pig, which is good and bad. And, New Orleans is such an awesome and weird place. And, I never, it's one of those places where it's like, I never would have moved there had it not been for school. And same with San Francisco, to be honest. And when I went and I visited, it felt familiar and also very different. It felt familiar in the sense that there's a lot of elements of New Orleans that remind me of the Bay. And, but then like the Bay, like on like drugs, like really intense. The nightlife, the
like a lot
everything.
Sweatier. Yeah.
Very sweaty. My stepmom's cousin lives in New Orleans, and she was going to take me around when I went to visit, and she was like, the one thing you for sure will always be, or the two things you for sure will always be in New Orleans is full and drunk. And I'm like, yep, that's accurate. And so, yeah, being able to kind of go to school in such a vibrant city with such a vibrant culture and history, but also with a lot of issues, and being in a place that was very different from other places I lived was a fantastic, eye-opening experience. And being in grad school in New Orleans made it a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun, but we also worked really hard too.
Yeah. So what was it about was there something about your background or upbringing, like, of really desiring that idea of building into community and people, and I mean, I think most architects maybe say that, but not to the extent that you're actually doing it, right? With the
trying to do it. Yeah.
Or at least at that point, you go, the schools you were choosing, that, that was the direction. Yeah.
Yeah. I think a part of it is, kind of being a female and being a Black female at that. I've always been in environments where I never felt included. I never felt that they were designed for me. And so I think I never really recognized that or knew exactly that's what it was until, later on in life. But that feeling of exclusion and that feeling of not being welcomed, I think resonated and kind of sat with me in a way that when I came across these programs of like, let's help others, let's do good for others, I was like, yeah, let's make people feel good. Like, let's make people, be in an environment that can be uplifting and be impactful in a positive way. And, be kind of like the background that hopefully helps them, change their lives for the better. And so I think kind of my background in that sense has definitely played a role in terms of how I approach architecture, how I approach design, what, kind of what architecture is for me, and kind of why I'm in this profession versus something else.
Well, do you have a distinct kind of memory of that feeling that architecture was excluding you early on? And maybe it's not architecture, but yeah.
I think you come into spaces and you feel like not only the scale is off, like as not just something that's very specific to, being an African American or anything like that, but like you come into a space, it's cold, it's dark, it's quiet, the scale is off, it's not made and fitting for you. And then laying on top of that, the policies and procedures that are occurring in those buildings. And then, the looks that you get when you're in these spaces. And it's all about that kind of feeling that you get and the vibe that you experience. And then in addition to it, it's that certain types of buildings are very representative of, I would say certain elements in buildings are very, very representative of certain times in history. And which are a direct correlation, for example, like, colonnades and like kind of plantation style homes. It's like, for me, that is equating to slavery. And that is a direct representation of the fact that that is a symbol of power, and the fact that people build, government buildings and, very, power driven buildings with those forms is kind of a direct correlation of being like, this isn't for you. This isn't made for you. You don't belong here. And yeah, it's really unfortunate when you're in a space where you have to be, whether it's school, work, that you don't feel included and you don't feel like you're there. You're supposed to be there. And that takes a toll. Yeah.
Okay. So you did Tulane, and then what was next?
After Tulane, I moved back to the Bay. I was living in Oakland and working in San Francisco for about 3-ish years. I worked for a firm based in San Francisco that their portfolio was half affordable housing projects and half schools. And I worked on their affordable housing project side. And that was a fantastic experience. The company I was working for was, female owned, about 25 to 30 employees. So, on the mid-ish size, but still on the smaller mid-size. And we're working on projects, in public housing in San Francisco. And we're working with clients who are incredibly underrepresented and marginalized, and deal with all the crap that comes with living in cities and the history and the politics of, redlining and discrimination. Like, those projects were the representation of those things in our current time. And it was a wonderful, hard experience of being a part of and involved in those projects. And I learned a ton. And with that firm, my boss was fantastic. She basically just like, here, you're going to manage these projects. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And she's like, you'll figure it out. And so I got a lot of responsibility very quickly. And I loved it. I loved being kind of like thrust in that position where I was uncomfortable most of the time and didn't know what I was doing most of the time, but I got comfortable in it and I learned how to ask questions. I learned how to, be proactive and be like, I don't know what's happening. Like, help me. And because of that, I think I've had a lot of, being somewhat young in the profession, I've had a lot of great opportunities since then in terms of being, in a position of leadership at other firms and taking on more responsibility than someone potentially at my age might have been able to do.
Yeah.
So I'm really grateful for that.
That seems really powerful that, normally, or a lot of times you come out of school with some grand ideas and then it's hard to put those into play. Right. And you were able to get into a firm that's doing that. And then to get that kind of leadership and responsibility right away. That seems like a lucky or a good situation. Yeah.
I think it really worked out well to an extent because, the recession caused that whole like missing middle, all those people who left that population or the profession at that time. And so there was a really big need for those people, but no one was there. And so the opportunity was there for me to be able to kind of step into it, to grow into it. And so it's kind of just weirdly good timing in a weird way. And then also, of course, having a boss who, was a woman and understood that like, I probably would not get the same opportunities at other firms. And so she's like, I'm going to give you these opportunities and you're going to do well.
What was that firm? What was the name?
Gelfand Partners Architects.
Okay. So then why aren't you still there?
So
what happened next?
So I was there and I was working for them for a little while and I got licensed there and I think I just got to the point where I was like, that whole me always being busy and like always striving for the next thing. I was kind of like, well, what's next? I got my license, like, ta-da, I hit this milestone in my career. I was like 27 or 28 at the time. It's like, kind of like, now what? And
now I'll get comfortable. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I'm like never really been really comfortable with getting too comfortable with things. Right, I always find myself like changing things up when I get too comfortable, which is like good and bad. And then the city itself has been changing so much and the Bay has got increasingly year by year, incredibly more expensive. And I was just kind of ready for a change of place and change of scenery. I'd lived in the Bay for at that time about 7 years of my life. And, the longest place I've lived outside LA. And, the Bay has always been and will always be home for me for sure. But I just was ready for a different place to feel like I can really, hone in my skills more and kind of dive in and be and create something, like be something and create something. And so I was kind of like, looking at a bunch of different cities. And at the time, my boyfriend at the time lived in Colorado. And so I was like visiting. And so I was like, okay, maybe I could move here. And I liked it. I love to ski. I love to rock climb. I love to camp, like all that crap. And so I was like being able to do that, closer than 3 hours away that it is, to Tahoe. And kind of being in a smaller city that's something more affordable. And being in a state that's growing and growing rapidly and the idea of being able to be a part of that growth was very exciting, and very intriguing. And, also the idea of like living in a city that snows was like, I was very excited about that.
There's less sweat here. Yeah.
Less sweat, but very, very dry. I've learned very quickly. So Colorado was kind of just a really appealing option. I was also looking at a couple other cities, but I think Colorado, it felt like it had the most opportunity for me long-term. And kind of the place that has the most, kind of like quality of life that I was looking for.
Yeah. So what was the job market like then? Where did you look around?
So I ended up at John Smith & Stroh, so at JNS, and I was there for about a year and a half. And that was an interesting experience.
Not as much affordable housing.
No, right? and that's also a part of it too. Is like I was looking to kind of broaden my my knowledge base. I had, I was getting really good at the affordable housing side and kind of addressing those issues and those concerns within that. But I felt that, especially those are also affordable housing renovations too. So I was really interested in getting excited about, doing a new build or doing something was a little different and kind of being able to get the experience of other types of projects. And so working for a firm that did not do much of that. They definitely had some affordable housing projects in their portfolio, but it wasn't their bread and butter. It wasn't their kind of go-to projects. Was an interesting change, and it was a nice design challenge. And so I worked on a few hotel projects with them, and learned a whole new, set of skills. And
there's something for just, I feel like they craft buildings very well, and learning that, right? And it's hard to try to think that, we live a long time and we can focus on one thing for a few years and go to something else and not get freaked out about, I'm not doing exactly what I want. But so then what after that?
And so I left J&S after a year and a half. They're really, really good designers, but I struggled a lot with the management. And so definitely part of that was being a female in a management role, being a Black female in a management role. I definitely clashed with some of my coworkers because of that. And I dealt with a lot of crap because of that. And so I remember one day I was like, I need to get the fuck out. I was like, I gotta go. And so I started switching around, and I ended up getting a job with Kephart. And I was attracted to them because, they're, 100% housing, and I wanted to kind of get back into the housing realm, and they also do some affordable housing sometimes as well. And the company culture was a little bit more in line with what I was looking for. And so I was with them for about almost 2 years. It's usually like my year and a half mark is like my oh, well, I feel like after a year and a half, you really see what the firm's about. Yeah. And then you're like, okay, maybe this isn't for me.
Yeah. And it's gotta be hard if you have like you being in a position of possibly coming in conflict at a firm, right? To be able to feel that right away or not, right?
Yes. So, I mean, sometimes it's not right away. I think a lot of people are like, oh my God, you're Black and you're female, you're an architect. Whoa. So there's this novelty attached to it. But then, after a couple of months, when you're pushing back on things and you're saying like, oh, well, what if we try it this way? They're like, oh, no, you don't know what you're talking about. They're like, no, we can't do that. That's not how it's done here. And, being dismissive, being, having younger coworkers question my decisions to our bosses, and then having my bosses come to me being like, oh, why did you do it this way? It's like, because that's how it's supposed to be done. And then be like, oh, right. Okay. And basically listening to the younger staff complain about me, say that I'm aggressive, say that I'm, mean, when I'm just asking them to do their job, and I'm asking to do their job in a very professional and friendly manner. And I've had coworkers talk to me in very inappropriate ways, and I've been very vocal about, you do not speak to me that way. Period. And then being put into trouble because I stood up for myself. I've had that happen on multiple occasions. I was actually fired from a job because I stood up for myself.
Wow.
And I wouldn't take their bullshit. It's really crappy sometimes. And, I think one of the prompt questions that you're asked about, when have you ever felt, like you wanted to leave the profession? And I have felt that many times, no matter, even though I love architecture and I love what it can do, I have felt that this profession is incredibly exclusive. It is incredibly discriminatory, both in the profession itself in terms of working here, but also the design practices that a lot of firms have. And I think it can be much better, and it has a lot of room to improve. And I want to be a part of that. Part of that, making it better, making that change.
Did you feel a difference when you were in San Francisco and in Geffen? Like, obviously it's probably, a lot more diverse and just the structure that a boss can set up, I guess. I mean,
it's a lot more of a diverse city, a lot more liberal of a city. I think people, Colorado, I think has the, on a face value, looks very liberal, but it's actually not. And the Bay is just way more accepting and open of all kinds of people, and they've always been like that. Even though San Francisco still has its issues for sure. And I know for a fact that had I stayed at that firm, I would have been an associate or a principal by now. I would have had ownership of it right now. But I also knew that had I left that firm and gone somewhere else, like I would not probably have had the drive that I have now to start my own thing.
Yeah.
So I think having challenges in your career and dealing with a lot of crap is really hard, but it can be very fulfilling at the same time too, because of how it forces you to grow as a person and how it forces you to really, find your inner, for lack of a better word, balls, and like fucking just like, just do what feels right to you and be true to yourself.
Well, and just that idea of, you could have stayed in San Francisco and you could have left the profession, or you left the profession, but you're not helping people here or helping to challenge. Yeah.
And so I'm overall, even though I've dealt with a lot of stuff since living in Colorado, professionally, I'm happy I moved here. I'm happy I'm in this environment. I'm happy I've been challenged in this way. I'm happy that I've, learned a ton about so many different things, good and bad. And I'm very happy and grateful for all the opportunities that I've had. And I'm excited to kind of, help shift things forward so other people coming up in this profession don't have to deal with the same issues I've had to deal with. However, I'm sure that they'll have their own issues they'll have to deal with. Right. But hopefully they'll be, a little bit less discriminatory and a little bit less race-based. It'll be, something else. Something else that that puts people down. Like, hopefully, it's something that's a little bit less, not putting people down, but it's like they're dealing with like, what it means to work remotely all the time. I don't know. But right. It'll be a little different. Yeah. So you were there for about 2 years, and then I'm like looking at your LinkedIn here, and like going down and down. I like and that. And then Engine 8, is that Yep. And then I was at Engine 8 for about 9 months. And us, kind of brand new small firm here in Colorado, started by two architects who worked at SAR for a really long time. That was a really toxic environment, to say the least. It was really toxic. I feel like that was a very, pinnacle experience for me of really noticing and experiencing microaggressions and macroaggressions and, gaslighting and being told that I'm doing a bad job, even though I'm working really hard. I've never felt so kind of diminished and put down there in a firm that I felt than working there. And I left there. I was actually fired there from after kind of standing up to myself, because I was basically being told that I wasn't doing a good job and I wasn't doing the work that I was asked to do, even though I was and had documentation of that. And I stood up for myself, and I was just like, this is absolutely unacceptable. Like, I cannot believe that you're trying to like say that I'm not doing my job. And it took me like, I feel like that company was just very kind of emotionally abusive. I came out of it having kind of having like PTSD from that experience, and having to really work hard to kind of find my comfort level again and find my like, oh, right, I do actually know what I'm doing, kind of voice again. And that's something that no one should have to go through. Yeah. How many people were at that firm when you were there? There's 4 of us, which is a part of the problem. Yeah. And so was it across the board, that kind of environment, or was it directed towards you? It was definitely across the board. But I got it in a different way than my coworker got it, for sure. So it's really unfortunate because I was really excited for the opportunity to work there. I thought that the company had a lot of really interesting projects and a lot of really interesting kind of like growth. I could see them being, like a powerhouse here in Denver and not just in Denver, like all over the country. I think I was very excited for the experience and I was very much let down. And yeah, that was very unfortunate.
Because it's so difficult with those ultra small firms, right? Like personalities really come to the fore and relationships. Yep. And so then you were like, I'm going off to Page. I'm going off to a big firm and see if this is better. Or
I mean, I didn't really have the choice. I was looking, at the time before I got fired. I had already started searching for jobs a few months prior, and I was trying to take my time and make like the right decision, so I wouldn't end up in a similar situation down the road, and not just like rush to something else. So I got fired, and then I was searching around at several firms here in Colorado, and I got a few different offers, and Page felt right. I had a really good interview. I just had really good connections and conversations with some of the principals there. And they were very much just like, we don't do things just because it's the way that we do things. We want you to be a part of something. We want you to, have a voice, use your voice, speak up when, when things aren't going well. And they've really stayed true to that. I started working there 3 weeks before quarantine started.
Welcome to the firm.
Yeah. And so, I was still like learning people's names when I was just like, I'm gone. And I'm still, I think, like the new employee there, which is funny.
But now it's easier to know people's names because it's just under their face and Zoom all the time. Yeah, it's like everyone's wearing a name tag.
Yeah. And so they have very much, throughout this whole stressful last year, they have been incredibly supportive, not only in terms of, our own comfort level, but and supporting us to work remotely and giving everything the tools we need to do that. But kind of supportive with the fact that I, wanted to start my own company and wanted to, really wanted to see if I wanted to work for myself, and allowing me the flexibility to be able to do that, in terms of like, not having issues that, that I'm working on single family projects outside of work. They have been, they've just been a really positive experience, a really good group of people. It's been great.
Because they're like a pretty old firm, right? From Texas, but are they pretty recent here? I used to live downtown. I would like walk past their office every morning, and kind of look in, but I guess they're not there anymore. But
they've been in Denver for, I want to say like 6 years, maybe a little bit longer. But they're based in Texas, and there's offices, there's like 6 or 7 offices all over the country. We're in Republic Plaza now, so they like switch locations. They used to be on like 15th Street, and, like Blake or something like that. From out of all the offices, I think Denver's not the smallest, but close to the smallest. I think we're about like 35 or 40 people right now. Whereas like the Houston office is like 100 plus people.
What's that been like? Because you've worked at a lot of firms, right? But that's kind of like the first like more corporate firm, right?
Yeah, and I was a little worried about how corporate it would feel, but it doesn't really feel corporate. And I think a part of that is because I'm with a smaller office in a newer city, or an office that has a newer office in a newer city. So I think we've kind of, from what I've seen so far, they've had their own a little bit more distinct culture and a little bit more distinct ways of doing things. And, there are, of course, their bureaucracy and sometimes getting something, some answers, some decisions may take a little bit longer because there's a lot of channels that you have to go through, but it really hasn't felt, that like quote unquote big firm that you're just a number at all.
Yeah.
And that's what has always been kind of a fear of mine of like working for a firm of this scale, is like, oh, I'm just number 572 and, whatever.
Here's my cubicle. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it's been really great.
I think that's it. It's an interesting thing because I feel the same way, where I don't like this idea of a corporate firm and of being part of this huge mass, but of course my wife works at Gensler, is like the huge firm, right? And always trying to convert me and saying it's so nice. And no, but I see, and there's definitely those benefits of the kind of like Hive learning or something like that, right? Like all the resources that you have, and thinking about sort of the challenges that our world faces. And it seems like those are the firms that are able to start tackling those, right? Like working on a larger scale. But it does just scare me, this idea of like firms eating up bigger, smaller, bigger, and what does it allow for someone like you and me having our own firm of one person or two people? But
I would say yes, it does, because I think we're successful when there's diversity around. Diversity in people, diversity in economies, diversity in scales in terms of project types. Like we need big firms, we need small firms, and we need firms in between. And I think people forget that in the sense of like, a lot of companies, they just want to get big and be, really powerful. And it's like, I don't want that for myself. Like I want to have projects that mean something to me, that I can really dive into and give my all to and be really proud of, and, really make my clients happy and excited, and then move on to something else that also does that. And so if that means, I stay just me, or, maybe one day I'll have an employee, that's fine. Like I didn't come into architecture to become like a multimillionaire. Right. If I want to do that, I would not have done architecture. But I still think you can be, a very well-off person working in architecture. I think it depends on, how you go about it. And I think there's room for everyone there. Yeah. We just have to make sure that we make room for people as well. Yeah.
So that leads us into, how do you say it? The 5WH? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I didn't know if it was like the 5 was turning into an S, or like, I was trying to read it for a while as a word, but, so tell me about like the genesis of that and the name, and kind of what prompted it. How did you get started? So, I have been thinking about kind of this idea for a while, and I think it kind of was in reaction to my experience of design at some of the companies I've worked at, in Colorado specifically, and how design wasn't really focused on the people who are going to be using the spaces, but they're focused on like how much money we can make, and how much square footage we can squeeze out of this unit to make it work. There are a lot of conversations of like, skinning a building, and like that, the skin and the materials you use as the architecture of the building. It's like, that's not it. Yeah, definitely. And so just having all these conversations and situations come up, and like, that just feels really wrong to me. And I'm trying to analyze like, what about this feels weird? And I think a part of it is that, we weren't taking the time to really ask the questions of why we're doing this and what's the importance of this. And so it kind of got me into the idea of like the 5WH, which is the 6 questions that you ask when problem solving. So who, what, when, where, why, and how. Nice. I like that. And so really kind of taking that on, and as a reminder of always be asking those questions throughout the design process, throughout everything, to always be checking in and kind of taking that pause as to like, is how we're going about this the right way? Is there something else we should be doing? How are we doing this well? How do we achieve these things? And just always questioning, always asking those questions. So you were like, I want to start this. And then did you get a project, or did you get a project and then you said, I want to start this? What was it was like, I had this idea. I don't really want to start my own firm. This seems scary. Like, I don't want to do work for myself. This seems like a lot of work. And it just was like, I think I came up with the idea like in 2018. And I was like, after like working at, Kepler and then going to like Engineer and my experience Engineer. And I was just realized like, I need to work for myself. This isn't going to work long term. I feel like I'm jumping to firm to firm. I probably won't be satisfied until I'm my own boss. And so I don't have to like deal with microaggressions from other people and like all that kind of crap that comes with it. And I was like, I need to just see what happens with this. And so I, put a website together, and it became a lot more intentional with it. And that was kind of happening as I was still working at Engineer. And then it was pretty much solidified by the time I got to Page.
And and so how did it start? I was a part of this cohort for basically Black female entrepreneurs. And it was basically a business incubator.
What's it called?
It's through SistaBiz.
Okay.
It's a program here. And they really support and, provide a lot of support and facilitation for people to really grow and start and grow their businesses, specifically for Black women. And that was a really interesting kind of eye-opening experience of learning, the ways and things you need to do to run a business. Like I knew none of those things. I didn't have a business minor or anything like that. And so that was really helpful. And then kind of from there, they did an article about me because at the time, and I still think I am currently, I'm not entirely sure yet, but I was the only licensed female Black architect in the state of Colorado.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's nuts. It's horrendous. Actually sucks.
Yeah.
And so that article then led to a 5280 article last summer. And then I've had a lot of leads and clients kind of contact me through that. So that's kind of sparked the first project. Yeah.
Was that pretty exciting? Just meeting other entrepreneurs like yourself? I mean, because I was surprised. I looked at the stats like last year. I think Colorado is like 5% African American. Like it's such a small number. I wouldn't have said. And so tapping into that community. I mean, probably a lot of inspiring people.
Yeah, I mean, it was really great to be around other females who are also Black who understand the experience, and the fact that we've also, like, a lot of us decided to start our own companies for the same reasons. The fact that we've been dealing with all this shit for so long from all these other companies, and we're tired of being like beaten down and, having to work 3 times as hard as, a white employee and get paid less, and having to just continuously be fighting for our voice, be fighting for our opinion, be fighting for our positions, constantly having to prove ourselves that, oh yeah, I've been working in architecture for 10 years. Do I know Revit? Like stuff like that. I'm licensed. I've been licensed since 2015. People asking me about some of the most basic code stuff, being like, oh, are you sure about that? It's like, yes, I am sure. It gets exhausting. It's exhausting always having to kind of, have that fight all the time. And so I think being around other women who understood that and who felt that and who got that and experienced that in their own, affiliated professions, was really refreshing, because it was like, oh great, I'm not crazy. I'm not the only one. And that's been also very difficult in architecture, is that I am the only one. It is so difficult to be the only one of something somewhere, because you're alone. It's lonely. Yeah. There are very few people who I've interacted with, very few coworkers who can really genuinely, truly understand my experience. And I know I've met a lot of people who, since some of my experiences, who also get it. And that's been really nice, kind of growing my network in that way. But it's very hard to be alone.
Yeah, man, I bet. Obviously I have no frame of reference for that feeling. But I think, like, has it also been sort of exhausting this year, last year, with like this, like, now kind of spotlight that's come on you and this renewed focus? Is that, people looking to you for answers in a way, or, yeah.
It's interesting. It's kind of like a double-edged sword, because like I do have answers, and I do have my opinions, and I do have, ideas of how things should be different and how things should change. But at the same time, I think, it's really important for kind of that tokenism to not happen, to be not for, for people to not be like, oh, you're Black, you'll know things, and kind of expect that, versus, people who aren't of color taking the initiative and taking advantage of all the materials that are out there to learn for themselves and educate themselves and make themselves aware of their own issues, their own biases, and learn from them and change. And then take that education and teach someone else those things. And, everyone's talking about the idea of being an ally and being an advocate. And I don't want an ally or an advocate. Someone told me this thing in the past. She was like, I'm looking for an accomplice. And I'm like, yes, I am looking for someone who's doing the same thing I am and working hard side by side, fighting for the same thing, fighting the good fight with me. I don't want someone cheering me on in the background. I'm my own fucking cheerleader. Like I've have, and I always will be. I want someone who's there doing the work with me. And for me, the way I see it is that unless you're doing that work and you're putting the effort in and the time to learn about all these things, to learn about the history of the U.S., learn about the history and experience of all Black and brown people in the U.S., and then once you learn those things, sharing those lessons and really taking the time to dive into why things are the way they are and how you as a person contribute to those norms, and then change. Until you do all of that, anything someone says or does is performative.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean there's no ounce of worth to it until there are actions with it. And I think it's hard for a lot of, I guess, white people to be having, kind of having put it in your face, like, oh, I'm also part of the problem.
Yeah.
But I can tell you it's even harder having to deal with it.
I bet.
So, it's even harder to have to feel, I'm always aware of my space when I'm going in, when I'm out in public. I'm always aware of who's around me. I'm always aware of the kind of feeling and the vibe of a space. I always know where the exits are. And there have been many times where I have said no to like going to certain bars or clubs or events because I'm just like, I don't know. I don't really feel like I'm going to feel comfortable there. I'm going to fit in there because of whatever it might be. I'm also very aware of the friends I do things with and, what environment I'm going to be in with this particular person. Do I feel this person's going to have my back if something happens? It's really exhausting to have to always be that hyper aware and plan your life around, am I going to have to deal with some racist asshole because, for some reason they're drunk? Is my friend going to back me up if something happens? How it's like, I cannot even just begin to describe how shitty that feels, that you have to do that. And that's just like in the social standpoint. Imagine having to deal with that every single day when you go to work.
With like all the pressures that you have on normal architect,
exactly.
Right? With that on top
of that. Yeah. Yeah. And then on top of that, it's not only your coworkers and your bosses, it's the client, it's the contractors, it's the subs, every single person on every single level within the architecture profession and around, you have to deal with that. It is non-stop and it is exhausting. So for me, I don't need someone cheering me on, be like, you can do it. You can, fight those battles. Like I need someone fighting those battles with me.
Yeah. I think that's such a powerful kind of message for me. Like this idea of like, first I want to be like, hey, Kaci, what do I do? Right. What do I do as a white guy? And it's like, no, like, okay, first I need to just do some research, right? I need to do the work. And like, I feel like I tried to have a kind of a conversation about race with Nicia Street on this show. And I feel like I did it. I didn't do a very good job. And afterwards we had a good long conversation and I grew up in the middle of Kansas with an adopted Black sister. And so I'm always like, I'm not racist. I'm not, or whatever, right. but it doesn't, but then that stopped me from doing the extra work, I think, and even after when I talked to Anissa, she said, well, what was your sister's experience like? And he was like, you know what? I've never fucking asked her. Like, I've never asked her. Right. And so like, I went home for Christmas and finally asked her, like, what's it been like for you growing up in this town of 13,000 white people? And she went on for an hour and a half telling me stories that I'd never heard. Right. And like, she's like a decade younger than me. So we didn't overlap as much, but just her experience in the city that we grew up at being totally opposite of mine. Right. And like, obviously I don't need to tell you this, but it was like that first thing of like, I'm not even doing the thing talking to the person that I grew up with in my home, and it's like, so now, yeah, what else do I need to be doing? What else do I need to start?
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's a really interesting point. And I think that comes down to like, you became aware, you know what I mean? Like you're trying to open up your awareness. And I think a lot of people don't do that because it's hard. And it's like, yeah, life is hard.
Yeah.
Becoming a good person is difficult. Unlearning the things that you have learned and unlearning the things that society has taught you is really hard. And kind of questioning your values and your beliefs is really challenging.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't have the privilege.
Yeah.
I don't have the privilege to not do that. And I think that, you know, people who are non-people of color also shouldn't have the privilege to not do that.
Mm-hmm.
But you do.
Yeah.
And that sucks.
Yeah. When it's so easy, just, if I don't see it and it doesn't affect me, to put my Black Lives Matter sign up in my yard and keep going on my day. Right. I mean,
exactly. And I think, you know, and for me and some of my friends, you're asking about like, you know, your instinct is to be like, oh, my Black friend, like, what is your experience? How do I change this? And for me, it's like, depends on the person who asks me. It will depend upon how I answer. Sometimes I'll be very open to be like, we'll have a great conversation, but it's because I know they're coming from a place of authenticity. They're coming from a place of genuine care. And they're coming from a place of, you know, they have done some of the work on their own to find some of these answers themselves. And it's not like, how do we solve it? It's like this specific question about the specific thing. What do you think about this? And it's like, oh, that's a great question, a great topic to, you know, let's talk about that. But when you have people who are like, oh, well, you should join this thing because, you know, from your background, you seem like you might know stuff. It's like, you want me there because I'm Black. And it's like, granted, I have a lot of things to say and I could be a very beneficial person in this, you know, whatever capacity, but like, that's not my role. That's not, you know, my responsibility to teach you how to be a better human. It's an interesting kind of dichotomy where it's like, I want to be able to, and in some instances, I definitely do take the time to help others. But at the same time, it's like, I also can't take on that responsibility because it's not my responsibility to bear.
Right. Yeah. And there's probably so much coming up, trying to be put on your shoulders at this time. I mean, it's like, I'm on the Jedi committee at CU, and it's like 7 white faculty members and 3 Black students. And it's all of like, you know, I feel for the one architecture grad student, because it's just like, it's kind of all on her, and we're like, well, what's wrong, you know, like how can we fix the school? But it's just like, she's like, I'm working, I'm going to school, I can't do this. And I'm like, you know, and so it's just obviously
when you
it's
live,
like, what do you do, right? Yeah.
And also like when you live that's your daily experience on top of, you know, being a student and working, and then also being Black or a person of color and dealing with all that entails just on the normal, then to be put in a position where then you have to teach other people about your experience and relive your experience over and over and over again. It's like, it can be a lot. And then, you know, when you have, you know, like George Floyd shootings and seeing your people get murdered, or, you know, the 8 Asian Americans who were killed in Atlanta, you know, even though I'm not Asian, like that took a toll for me. And every single time it does. Like the Boulder stuff that happened, you know, just this week. I ended up having to take a day off of work because I just like could not deal. Like I was like spending the day just like crying. It really takes a physical and emotional toll when you do not feel safe in the city that you live in.
Yeah.
For many reasons. And it is really unfortunate that people don't have the empathy, enough to be able to, sorry, my cat's sick.
She has something to say. Yeah.
To be able to have the empathy to understand that, like, you know, even though this hasn't happened to you, to be able to be like, this is really not okay. And I think we all can learn from, we all can use a lot more empathy in our lives to be able to really take someone's experience and feel for them and see, you know, how that could be so devastating and kind of hurtful, and be like, what can I do to make this better? What can I do in my own life, and even on like a very small scale, to make this a little bit better for someone else? What can I do to not perpetuate these things? And that's where it starts.
Well, and it's powerful, like you're saying, like on an individual level, but then the profession that you chose, right? You have a power on a larger level. And I think that it's interesting, just the amount of architecture that you can do, right? The amount of typologies or firms or whatever you can go into. And I'm finding it's very hard to actually get a project that you really help people, right? That's not developer driven or not, or, and so how do you see yourself like directing your firm forward in the future to be able to be in that position, maybe?
Yeah, I think, I think a part of it, and, this is where I'm incredibly grateful for, Page and them supporting me through all this, is that I'm able to be picky right now about the projects I take on because I'm not financially tied to them.
That's nice.
Yet.
Yeah.
And so, one day maybe I will be, but like, I can be picky, and, that allows me to work with clients who I feel I would get along with, who I feel, I respect and they respect me, who I feel will just be a good fit and a fun experience. And so definitely long-term, I think being able to really focus on and have, and build enough of a foundation and project base to be able to get those kind of projects that I'm able to work with people who, really have those kind of values in mind, I think is definitely my goal. And I think a lot of the people who have reached out for projects already have those values. And I think a lot of those people who reached out, they reach out to me specifically because they're looking for something different.
Yeah.
And that's great. And so there definitely have been some people I kind of have to like, no, thanks. Like, we're not going to vibe well together. And I can tell that you're reaching out to me because I'm a Black female, versus like, versus like my mission and kind of values and approach to architecture. But I think I will hopefully attract those people.
Yeah.
One day.
Nice.
That's the goal.
Soon. I can see it soon for you. Yeah. Well, yeah, cool. I really thankful for you coming on and like giving us a really good story and just a powerful message about your experience. Something that me and a lot of white people don't see, right? I just really appreciate the honesty there and the work that you're doing. And it's been fun seeing you kind of on the Christopher Kelly calls, like I spy on them a little bit. That's been a fun experience for sure. Being a part of that leadership group program, kind of meeting everyone virtually and kind of getting to know everyone through their kind of conversations, and it's been really interesting. Yeah. Well, cool. Yeah, it'd be good to get together once this is all over and
I love that
in person. So
yeah, sounds good.
Thanks.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this week's show.
You can visit architecting.com, that's architect-ing.com, to see images from this week's guest.
And please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.
Have a great week and keep connecting.
I was so like dumbly nervous to talk to you, I guess. It's
really?
Just like, I bought White Fragility just to read before you. And like, it's like, I need to do my homework. I need to do these. It's just, and it's, it's getting into like, why is it so hard for white people to talk about this? And it's like, it really is. And it's so dumb, but it's like, it just brings up weird emotions of like shame of my race, and like, and just, I don't know, but thanks for making it easy. Yeah. So,
yeah, of course. And I think also with it, it's like, we've all been taught to not talk about it. And that's a part of the reason why we have so many issues, is because we don't talk about them. And I think communication is so important for like everything in life, but especially around, difficult conversations. And it's like society has taught us that like these are things that are like taboo, that you don't talk about politics and race. You know what I mean? It's like, and so we have to kind of break that. And I think by having more of these conversations and really engaging in this way, it becomes a little bit easier every single time.
Yeah.
I also have like a ton of resources if you want them about kind of like all this kind of stuff for like race and I just got this book called Disability Visibility, and it's about like disability in design and architecture in the world. And like, I myself, like, even though I live this stuff, like I'm learning too. And I'm learning, other ways of having these kind of conversations. And I'm learning, how, even though I've always known how hard it is for like when people have these conversations, like, kind of like you're saying, like the root and the cause of it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think we're all still learning. And I think that's approaching it in a way of like, we're all human. We all don't know everything under the sun, and coming from a conversational standpoint of like, not me versus you, but like, how can we like learn together? How can we, share each other's experiences and be like, oh, well, that's interesting. Or like, oh, I didn't know that. And like kind of grow from there.
Yeah. But yeah, that'd be awesome if you sent over that resources and I could like put it on the page somehow and share that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But it, like you're saying, it's the good weird where we're being put in proximity to each other and talking about these things. And that's where the weirdness comes from, right? Or the unsettledness maybe.
Right. And then realizing that like, once you have the conversations, they're not as scary as you think they are.
Yeah.
And I think that also deals with like stereotypes too, where it's like, I think it's the stereotype of like Black women are going to be aggressive, mean, and like, bullish, which is like this horrible stereotype that's been projected throughout centuries. And so having those conversations, with a Black female is going to be very different than having them with a Black man or, an Asian man or an Asian female. And so it's there's so many layers that like I feel like I'm still learning about, unraveling and understanding. And I think we're all going to be learning and doing this work for our entire lives, as we should. And I think the first step though is kind of really just getting comfortable with being uncomfortable and learning that like that's okay. I feel icky, but like I'm gonna work through it.
But let's talk about it. Yeah. And I think just if our world can get more integrated together, right? I mean, just how white Denver is.
Yes.
And moving here, I wouldn't have thought Denver was that white. Like I'm from Kansas, that's white, right? Like, But
Colorado is weird, is because it's this like quote unquote liberal place that's like super not. And it's like, I feel like Colorado is like the most liberal for some people. They're like, oh, it's like liberal enough, but they're really just like moderates. Or you get the like, bolder, really liberal to the point you're like almost kind of a Republican again, liberal, where it's like, you make me uncomfortable because you're just like too much right now. Liberal. And, it's a weird like combination of like this like cowboy culture. I have my gun in my truck, but I live in downtown Denver. And then like, I love to compost and like that kind of stuff. It's just this weird dichotomy of things that Colorado's strange. It's kind
of like, it's kind of like oil and water, right? Where there's just like globs of liberalness, but it's not blended together. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great analogy. Whereas I think California as a whole, there's definitely the Republican pockets for sure, but overall it's incredibly more liberal, like liberalism is more saturated and it's more of a norm, and you definitely feel the difference.
Yeah. Well, and it's more ethnically diverse as well, right? I mean, yeah.
Yep.
And I see a lot of promise, like with the students that I have, especially in undergrad. It's a very diverse school, and Mark Swackhammer is like, he's great. Really great. Yeah. And so I just keep kind of wondering, when is that diversity going to start getting up into the profession, right? Is it a time thing where they haven't got there yet? Or is it a thing where minorities are hitting a ceiling and going out of the profession, and the school's been that diverse for 10 years and you just don't see people, like?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think, I was on a webinar yesterday with NOMA, and they're talking about kind of this thing about, people, the need for, increasing the pipeline and scholarships and mentorship for people to come into the profession and stay in the profession. And, I think it's really great that people are focusing on educating kids at a young age, like architecture is a profession that you can do this too. And providing the financial ability to have people do it, because obviously profession is, school is really expensive. It's hard to work while you're doing it. It's, it's a privilege in itself to be in school studying architecture. But I think, they're kind of also missing the point in the sense of that, you might get them there, but they're going to want to leave. Like, they're not going to stay in the profession because the profession itself, the culture of the profession is not in such a way that it's inclusive, and it's not in such a way that's inviting and welcoming for people of color to stay. And then on top of that, especially when you're starting off, you don't get paid well. So it's like, there are many things that are like, why am I here? Why am I doing this? And I think this is about architects in general. It's like, to be an architect, you really have to have a passion for it. But I think to be like a Black architect or a person of color architect, you really have to have a passion for it. And you really have to be like, there's nothing else I can be doing. Because if there was something else I could have been doing, I don't know, like 5-6 years ago, I probably would have done that. Yeah.
I wouldn't have gone through all the schooling. And this particular school type. Yeah.
Right.
And
but it is really good to see, like, I think like CU is so diverse in comparison to a lot of other programs. And thinking back to my undergraduate education was also very diverse. Like, out of the 20 kids, there were, I think we're at least half female. And then there, I think out of 20, I think there are at least 14 people of color, of all colors.
Wow.
And I never really realized how diverse our class was until, I went to Tulane and kind of like graduated and was like talking to other people's experience. And then it's like, it was just like very diverse, and it was, spectacular. And I kind of wish I, really understood the value of that even more while I was there.
But was Tulane not very diverse?
No.
No, really?
Tulane is a very white university.
Oh, okay.
It was actually, so in my class, there was one other Black girl. Her name is Victoria. She's a really good friend of mine. And for the entire 3 years I was there, people could not keep our names straight. We looked nothing alike.
Victoria and Kaci, they really, yeah.
And she's like,
they're
really
very similar
tall,
names.
and she's like, she's like dark, and she's like, we look nothing alike. And yet, it's a very small school. Our class was 14 students, and they could not keep our names separate. And so, Tulane is a very white school. New Orleans is interesting because it's there's a lot, obviously a huge African American population, but the city is so segregated. But then there's also like where things intersect that are also really interesting too. That can be like beautiful, but also like cause a lot of conflict. So if you haven't been to New Orleans, I highly recommend it.
I have not actually. I kind of stay out of the South, but I need to explore a little more.
It's so like New Orleans is like definitely like a blue and a sea of red.
Yeah.
And, like the rest of Louisiana is just like, and I also like kind of, especially growing up in Southern California and LA, and kind of having that like LA like slight pretension of like, oh, the South. There's some amazing people down there. There's some amazing, just like cultures and experiences I've had, and it's a weird but fantastic place at the same time. And I think people don't give it enough credit.
Yeah.
Even though there's a lot of shit down there too. And, all the stuff that happened like yesterday in like Georgia, and like all that election stuff was like bonkers. But there are some really great people who live there, who are from there. And I think as people, we have a tendency to kind of just like, stereotype and categorize and group people to be like, oh, the South, you're all terrible. But it's like, that's not the case, And I think as a culture, we all need to not do that, myself included. It's hard because that's how we've learned how to talk about things. But I think it's important for us to just really, just kind of be like, okay, there's some weird people, but there's some good ones too. And that's the truth everywhere.
Yeah. And just that ability to talk to everybody, right? And not just fall back into our camps even more, which is harder and harder. So do you think that, like, within this last year, I mean, it has to have been a lot easier for minorities to get jobs within architecture firms? I would think there's a scramble for like firms to diversify, but I don't know. I guess it's also a hard time with COVID, right? Like if people aren't hiring, but
I think also it's like, what minorities?
That's
like
true.
there still aren't many of us, I'm one of 500 licensed female Black architects in the country since the start of licensure. So like some of those people are dead, you know what I mean? So it's like,
you mean like in history, like in the history. Wow. Huh.
And so it's like, so it's like, where are people of color? There's a lot of people at school, and it also goes with women as well. So it's like, there are a lot of women and people of color in schools, but then once it gets to a certain point into the career, like they're gone. And I think that's the question that we should be asking firms, is be like, why is this happening? What about your culture is causing this to happen? And kind of addressing that, or at least starting to address it. And I think, since all the events since last summer, I think firms are starting to realize like, oh, okay, maybe I need to be doing this. But I think a lot of firms are also doing it from an inauthentic standpoint. I think they're doing it because they feel like they have to, versus them actually wanting to. A friend of mine who works for a large firm, and she's been trying to kind of get her boss to kind of sign off on, doing certain things. And she sends them all these like emails, and his response is just like, nice. It's like, cool. You really don't care. And so I think that's really difficult.
Yeah. Because I guess it's, even if you get into a firm, but if they're coming at from an inauthentic place, right? Your experience is,
it's going to be equally as shitty.
You're going to be gone. Yeah.
He'll be tokenized, and that's also bad.
Yeah.
And so one thing so I'm on the co-chair for the JEDI committee for the AIA this year. And one of our kind of initiatives that we're doing is basically trying to get it so that one of the 12 continuing education credits is specific to a JEDI topic. And so that would cover, like literally anything about other people. So like, race, sexism, gender, sexual orientation, ability, age, like all those topics under the idea of like justice, equity, inclusion, and diversity, to have that be a requirement for 1 hour. And there's a lot of things that would qualify under that. Just so that people are, to an extent, forced to, at least for 1 hour of their 12 hours, become aware of something that of someone else, of something else. And I think others, California has, we have to do 5 hours in accessibility. And like, I think Minnesota has, they have to do 1 hour like business ethics. And so there's other precedents for it. So that's one thing we're trying to kind of push for Colorado. So
what else is that committee doing?
So that's one of the things we're doing. We also are working basically, so we're doing twofold. We're basically trying to attack and identify kind of firm culture and try to change firm culture. And then we're also trying to then also go the education around and kind of bring more people into the profession, and then provide ways and means for BIPOC people to stay in the profession. So, scholarships, pipeline, education of, high school students, like this is a profession you can do. And then it's also self-education in terms of as a committee, learning and growing and becoming more aware. And so we're trying to attack it from both sides of like firm culture and then the education. And from the firm culture side, we're basically putting together a series of resources and trying to put it up on the AIA website of like things you could do, people you could reach out to, and that so you can learn, so people can learn, and then the firms themselves could then one day take that on. And I think one of our really big lofty dream goals that won't happen this year would be to basically kind of create almost like a certificate program or some sort of like, I guess a certificate program where you could be like, I took this class, now I'm certified in this thing, and you have like continuing education like you do for LEAD or WELL. in JEDI issues. And so, and you can, do it either as a person or by a firm. And so the firm would go through a series of classes and unconscious bias training and all those things to kind of really learn and uncover and discover how they can be doing things different within their own firm and to help support their own company, but also the profession as a whole. So
that's a lot of work.
Trying to do a lot. Yeah. I mean, if we were able to really, my main goal this year is if we can get that one credit requirement, that would be a massive win.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens, but it's a really interesting group of people and it's a pretty diverse group of people too. And everyone has brings a lot to the table and we have some great conversations. Yeah.
Well, cool. Well,
awesome.
The kids just got home, so they're about to bust in the door here. So it was a good timing, but
awesome. Well, thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.